Kia ora tātou. My name's Anna Sandel. I am a clinical psychologist based at Auckland in Domain Lodge in Grafton. So some of you may have been there or been supported by somebody there, but you may be from somewhere else in Aotearoa. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining this morning. Again, as Stanley said, we will be recording the session, but only myself is being recorded, nobody else's videos. So you can keep your videos on or turn them off, but the key thing we ask is that you do put your microphones on mute so that we can have a clear recording for others to listen to once this is edited. So at the end, we will stop the recording and we will go through some questions, some opportunities for you to ask me some questions that might be more individual to your situation. And at that point, I will stop recording. Okay, any technical difficulties, please do send a message in the chat and Stanley will be there to support you. I won't be able to see any of your videos whilst I'm presenting, so if you're waving madly at me, I won't be able to see. So please do just send a chat message to Stanley or send an email to him there. Okay. So today's talk is finding a new normal is very much about life after cancer treatment, which for many of you in that situation or soon to be in that situation know it brings a whole heap of separate issues that can be really challenging to manage. A lot of the referrals, a lot of the people that we do see at Domain Lodge are often post-treatment. They're really struggling with kind of getting back to normal, and so it's really common for this stage to be very, very challenging for most. In my experience, it's not a walk in the park for most people, and there's a lot of expectations that it will be easy, and often it can be really hard for people when they realize, gosh, it's actually really hard getting back to life, given what I've just been through. So this is relevant for anybody post-treatment or completed active treatment. I will jump into the overview. So I'm going to talk about when does cancer end, or is there an ending, as well as those late side effects, those lasting side effects, particularly fatigue, which is the big one that affects people after treatment. It can just hang around for far too long, and there's no sense of sort of when it will begin to shift, which is really hard for people. Finding a new normal, so that's about, well, what's changed, what's different in the way that I think about life, or what's important to me, or what do I do or not want to do that's different to before. And then there's fears around the cancer coming back, which I'll talk about as well, and that's a big concern for people. So these are some of the most common things. Naturally, people do want to jump back to normal as soon as possible. That's a good sign. You enjoyed your life as it was before and you'd like to return to that. And often that kind of sense that normal is a new meaning for people, because sometimes there are some permanent changes that need adjusting to, and particularly processing, and the kind of emotional impact of cancer tends to hit people pretty much when it comes to an end, when the treatment finishes. That's really when it starts to surface, and people can be overwhelmed by mixtures of emotions, which are very normal and all in relation to processing those different changes and experiences that people have been through over the last few months or years. So we know that cancer leaves an impact, and the analogy we often use is the rings of a tree. So the events in our lives leave an impact with us, just like those lightning storms or those, you know, sort of harsh winters might leave marks on tree rings. We can see that. They do leave a mark, and it's not as though the events in our lives, such as being diagnosed with cancer, can go away or be forgotten. But as time goes on, those tree rings grow around the mark and the impact lessens. It becomes smaller because life becomes bigger over time. And there is a very normal, natural process where people are in that kind of adjustment phase. So often I like to encourage people, instead of thinking about treatment back to normal, think about an additional phase in between those two, which is about transitioning and rehabilitating. So you've got your treatment, and then you become kind of your own rehab specialist and doctor and nurse, and you take on that role of recovery, which can take time depending on how much treatment you had or the extent of your surgery and everything else that's going on. So I always encourage people to sort of be prepared for that, for there to be a transition phase, so that you're not throwing yourself back into life, which everybody wants to do. And everyone's very enthusiastic, and that's a good thing. But sometimes we need to rein that in, just so that the enthusiasm meets where the body is. So during cancer treatment, there's often a focus on the end and getting to a particular point that people have in their minds. For some, it might be the last chemo sort of cycle or appointment with the oncologist. It might be when they had their last Herceptin, or even last tamoxifen pill, you know, when they're no longer taking any medication. Or it might be the 5-year scan. So it's completely different for everybody, and means different things to everybody. And I don't think there's sort of a right or a wrong way to think about it, but it can be important to mark those different points along the way, to mark those milestones in some way that's meaningful for you, because each milestone that you do reach and get past represents a really big challenge that you've faced. And I think it's about acknowledging what it's taken for you to get to that point. For some, they may feel like there is no definite endpoint, depending on your prognosis. You know, it may be more kind of a learning to live with, and that's okay. There may not be a particular kind of time where people say that cancer's out my life. And so we focus a lot on this talk about kind of living with the different thoughts and feelings about cancer whilst not putting life on hold. So emotional healing, as I said, you know, physically, there is that Western disease model that you complete your treatment and then you're all better. And that assumption also generalizes to you're all better emotionally. But often people can feel worse physically after treatment with the chemo side effects that continue, or the fatigue, or emotionally they can really struggle. And often the big thing about finishing treatment is that support that people may have from their medical team, seeing them every week or every 2 or 3 weeks, having that kind of safety net around you. All that drops away when treatment finishes, and people are often told, you know, off you go, we'll see you in a few months. And that can be really quite disconcerting for people to feel like, but I don't know what to do. What if I have an unusual niggle, or who do I call? And it can feel really, really vulnerable for people when the medical team step back and say, okay, you go forward, and it's your job is now to recover. But the other thing that coincides with treatment finishing is friends and family have this perception that they're not needed anymore because treatment's finished, because you're all better. So again, there can be kind of a subtle drifting away of friends and family support, or people might stop ringing, texting, dropping over. to visit, and that also can contribute to that feeling of being quite isolated and quite vulnerable and quite lost. A lot of people use these words, lost or in limbo, or, you know, kind of a little bit kind of stuck really, as to how to go forward, and also kind of looking back and thinking, well, what just happened? I need to process this past few months, and everybody's expecting me to jump back to normal. And particularly for those people who don't have any physical appearance changes, they may look the same. That's even harder to explain to others. Hey, actually, there's a lot that's changed inside. And how do I communicate that to everybody else around me, that I might not be able to do the same amounts as I did before, or it's going to take me time. Checkups and appointments can also remind people, of course. So whether it's the anxiety that comes before a scan, which can be really difficult in those first 6 months to a year, or whether it's just stories that people might read, or friends who may be diagnosed, things will trigger lots of those feelings of, wow, this is where they're going through something that I went through a year ago. Medication, if you're taking that for a long time, that can be a reminder as well. So all of these things can bring up kind of difficult feelings, and the question is, what do we do when those show up? So I talked a little bit about what we call the cancer hangover. You may have some or more of these, or maybe very little. And that's a good thing if you've got very little of these. But typically there's going to be a lot of fatigue for a lot of people who've been through major surgery or chemo, radiotherapy, as well as some changes to physical appearance, changes in relationship dynamics, so changes in roles. So if you were the sort of person that sort of organized everything in the family and did a lot of the sort of practical things around the house, and those roles have been flipped, that can be quite difficult. It can be quite challenging to everyone's sense of identity or place in the family. Fears of recurrence, of course, and also kind of anxiety about how will I cope going back to work, particularly if there's cognitive changes like memory, concentration, the brain fog, that can be really common around that kind of menopausal age as well, which is adding to the brain fog, as well as kind of reassessing goals, values, what's important to me, some decisions that people may need to face around, you know, do I go back to work or do I not? Or do I shift my life in a different direction? Or do I make a change to my lifestyle? Do I maybe think about having a different way of living that may be better? So there's a lot of these questions about going forward, but there's a lot of kind of emotions, particularly grief and loss and sadness about the past, about things that have changed temporarily or permanently. And then there's also kind of a lot of meaning related thinking about faith. So people can lose faith if they have a religion, or they can affirm their faith, depending, it can go either way. And then a lot of changes to social life as well. So the relationships that you have with friends, with family, with your community may change. And sometimes those can bring difficult feelings as well. So these are sort of the key cancer hangover issues. So we can begin to understand why it's a hard time for people after treatment, and why it's erroneous to expect someone to jump back into normal life and cope brilliantly from day one. So as I said, part of finding that new normal is around acknowledging those losses and changes that have occurred. They are in a variety of different puzzle pieces. So we've got the physical changes. So that might be changes to how much you can do, your functioning, appearance, scars. But there's going to be emotional changes, or what I call psychological changes, to the way that you think about things. Particularly cancer can really throw people's beliefs about feeling safe in the world, feeling the world as predictable and certain, and feeling some sense of control over their destiny. Those three things are really shaken up. So there's some psychological losses around that loss of safety, certainty, control. And we do a lot of work with people about sort of processing, what does it mean to lose that kind of illusion of control that we go through life, kind of not expecting cancer to come around the corner. And that's a normal way to believe and think. But of course, when there's that kind of unexpected diagnosis that comes from nowhere for most people, it can really throw people's kind of sense of how they think about the world, the future, themselves. Practical changes. So people may have, you know, financial changes or changes in their living situation that they might need to be processing, as well as the social changes, which I mentioned earlier, around friendships, maybe drifting away, or, you know, some loss of relationships with people. And then spiritual changes. So again, questioning or doubting the faith that people maybe had or have. So we can understand why there's a lot of different changes people are coming to terms with, and particularly kind of identity and who am I and what matters to me are a lot of those types of questions people are beginning to ask themselves. All right. So I'll just talk briefly about post-traumatic growth. This is a term that in the literature describes how people kind of naturally, we're wired to adjust, adapt, and grow when change comes along. It's kind of in our DNA as humans to adjust and change. It takes time, but it does happen. And so over time, as people make sense of their experience and what does this mean to me, they begin to kind of see some growth, some benefit finding. Things are sometimes stronger, or there are some additional benefits that people get from their experience that they begin to draw on and use to strengthen how they feel about themselves and what's important in life. So often things that come up with my patients are, my relationship's stronger than ever. Now, this isn't everyone, but some people it is. Or it might be, I've got a really sharp focus on what's important to me now. And there's a sense of learning and appreciation for that learning. People may make some major lifestyle changes, and I've seen a lot of people quit jobs, get pets, move house, make some really big radical decisions in life as a result of the cancer prompting them to consider what is really important to me. How do I want to live the next chapter in my life? Now, I'm not saying that happens with everybody. So if you're feeling like you should be putting pressure on yourself to make radical changes or have these kind of epiphany moments where you have a completely different view on life, that isn't common, but some people will have that. A lot of people will say to me, look, I just want to go back to the life I had because that was important to me and it was enjoyable and meaningful, and I don't really want to change anything. And that is also okay too. All right. So yes, as humans, it's really natural when anything kind of traumatic occurs and cancer can be traumatic for people. It's natural for us to make meaning of that. What does this mean? What can I take from this? What can I learn? What can I gain? Now, don't expect that to happen as soon as you finish treatment. It is a sort of process that occurs naturally over time, and for everybody it's at different paces, but it does happen. Okay. So what really helps people to cope after they've finished treatment? So these are just a few really key things. We know consistently that good quality social support predicts people cope really well with cancer at any stage of the treatment, pre or post, during as well. And so keep your support strong around you. Now, how do we make sure we get support? How do we make sure that that support's still there for us? That's down to how we communicate that need. What do we need from people? Because often friends can have that assumption that, well, she's good. She doesn't want me, you know, hassling her anymore. She wants to get on with life. I don't want to impose, so I'll let her contact me when she needs me. People are kind of, you know, there's a lot of mind reading that goes on between people with cancer and all of those around them. So we can help them by good, transparent communication and letting them know, hey, I actually really still need you, and this is how I need you. I need you to meet me for a coffee every week, or virtual coffee at the moment. I need you to help with the kids' drop-offs. I need you to come and help me with the hoovering because my physical functioning isn't as it was still. I'm still working on this. So we communicate what's different, what we're still not quite able to do to others around us, particularly if you've got teenagers in the house, you know, make it really clear to them. Sometimes written communication as well, you know, make it very literal. Mum can't do the reaching up into the cupboard, so please, I need your help with some of these things still. And that will help you kind of feel understood, but also well supported, so that you're not overdoing it and pushing yourself too much to the point where you may aggravate symptoms. And processing emotions. So again, the emotional support from those around you in your support network is going to be really important. So it may be connecting up with others who have been through a similar experience to you. It might be kind of joining groups for a particular type of cancer online. It may be journaling. So it's a really good time to start kind of reflecting on, you know, your thoughts and feelings about what's happened by writing. That can really help people to make sense and process all of those different feelings. So I do encourage people that use the support network around you, but pick the people you know are good at emotional support. Not everybody is, and that's okay, but choose the people who you think, yeah, they're good listeners, or they're kind of understanding. If you feel like, you know, there isn't really somebody in your world that is able to provide you with emotional support, absolutely use health professionals for that as well. Okay, and then the final one is about using mindfulness, which we know has a heap of benefits physically and emotionally for people. The research shows it's very helpful after treatment, not so much during, but after treatment. You're going to want to think about, how can this help me in life? And mindfulness is very useful because what it does is it keeps us anchored in the present. It helps us to strengthen our attention muscle to focus on the here and now, be less caught up in the fears about tomorrow and the what ifs, which typically are around the cancer coming back. Or it might be about the losses of the last sort of 6 months to a year that you're processing, because post-treatment people are often in the future headspace, or they're in the past headspace, and they've got those two headspaces that they're drifting between. and less time in the now, in the present. So mindfulness is going to help you spend more time in the present, which is correlated with significantly better well-being emotionally and physically, and it will help you to pull back from those two headspaces, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of different ways to get into mindfulness. There's some free apps, they're all brilliant. There's some paid apps, it's totally up to you. And we also have some tracks on our website as well. You can go to the Relaxation and Mindfulness tab. We've got a list of meditation or mindfulness tracks we have created. But look, it's sort of exploring, hey, how do I get into this? And usually if you're a beginner, I say, look, start with 5 minutes a day. Don't throw yourself into the 20-minute one straight away. Okay. So again, that expectation to get back to normal, particularly work. I see a lot of people throw themselves back into a job 4 days a week, 5 days a week. Often there can be a sense of external pressure to do that, or there can be a sense that I need to get back to work for financial reasons. So I understand there's external pressures that can mean people feel coerced to go back too soon or for too many days. And typically what we do see when that happens is we see a bit of a crash, and then people have to take sort of longer extended periods of leave to recover from going in too much too soon, which can be hard on them and also their employer. So we always encourage people to go back really gradually, start with 2 mornings a week, not on consecutive days, and build up from there over the course of a month or 6 weeks to 3-4 days a week, so that you are dipping your toe in the water rather than diving into the deep end, because people can often overestimate their ability to cope at work, and it can be really overwhelming. And I think it does come down to that communication again, letting your employer know, I'm not ready, I need a bit more time, or I need to do this gradually. Delegating tasks, looking at whether someone can job share with you for a little while, figuring out some solutions so that you aren't having that really negative experience of throwing yourself back in and finding it all too much and not enjoying it, importantly. If you have private health insurance, an OT or an occupational therapist, or occupational health nurses, if you work in the sort of health system with a DHB, they can be really helpful advocates, and they can design a return to work plan for you. And they can meet with your boss with you and just be there to sort of, you know, advocate for what you need. But I think equally, you know, there are some information sheets on our website about educating employers about cancer fatigue and how it might impact their employees. So often I encourage people to print that off and hand that to their managers or their bosses and say, look, this is what I'm going through, and this is why I can't come back straight away. All right. Yeah. And so I think, you know, this I guess this slide does also point to expectations. So expectations of others, but also being mindful of your expectations of yourself. Sometimes overly positive thinking can be a little bit dangerous in this situation where you're thinking, yeah, I can go back 3 days a week full time, or 4 days a week full time. And sometimes that positive thinking can be a little bit tricky because it's kind of unrealistic. So it's always kind of keeping a balance and thinking, you know, practice in the weeks before you go back to work. Practice sitting for a certain amount of time on the computer and see how you feel, whatever your job entails. And so it's being really mindful of that gap that I sort of mentioned earlier, where your mind is sort of here and wants to jump back into things, and your body is sort of back here and saying, I'm not ready. So it's how do we meet in the middle? Okay, I will zoom on. So new normal, I think, just summarizing really, recognize things are different and acknowledge that that is okay, and very normal. There's a whole heap of things that are different for people, and it's completely unique to your individual experience. Some things are the same, of course, but some things are different. So a new normal is about what kind of work do I want to do? What's my identity? What do I value in life? What matters to me? Are there certain areas in life that I feel actually have been quite neglected? And is this a good time to review? Where do I put my energy if I've got less of it because of that fatigue? Do I want to put a little bit more energy into the things that are more meaningful to me and pull a little bit of energy away from the stuff that I don't get meaning from? So it's a really lovely time to view all those different parts of your life and reflect on maybe a rebalancing. How do I want to spend my leisure time? How do I, maybe serve a particular value that's been neglected for a long time? So creativity. And I'll talk a little bit about values after the break. And certainly, it's a big part of the work that we do with people after treatment is identifying what are my values and how do they translate into actions and behaviors. Okay, so what we're going to do is just take a really brief, quick, short break. I recognize sometimes it's hard to concentrate for a whole hour and sit for a whole hour. So I really encourage you just to get up and stretch for a couple of minutes. We will come back in about 3 minutes. So time to grab a cup of tea, do whatever you need to do, use the bathroom, and we'll come back very shortly. Now I just need to find where my video is gone. There we are. I've come back. Sorry, that took me a while to get myself back. Welcome back, everybody. So I will continue. I'm going to go and talk into values a little bit more. So if anybody has come across Russ Harris, he's written a lot of books. He talks a lot about this. His therapeutic approach is very evidence-based and really effective for a range of different issues, but particularly people kind of struggling with life after cancer. This can be really beneficial to think about your values. So values are things in life that are important to you, what matters, the things that make your heart sing. They are not behaviors, they're not things we do, they're things that we they're not things we achieve, sorry, so then they don't have an end. They're kind of guiding principles for the way that we want to be in life, in the different roles we have. So how do I want to be as a colleague on an ongoing basis? How do I want to be as a sister on an ongoing basis? What are the kind of 3 words that describe me when I'm at my best in these different roles? And that's how we kind of begin to unpick what are my values, what's important to me. So some examples of values can be around things like kindness, acceptance, adventure, humor, fun, fairness, creativity. There's about 50 or 60 of them, and they can relate to different areas in life. But the key thing about values is that we can't ever reach an end. So love doesn't have an end, but we can always be loving in the different parts of our life and the different roles that we have. There are some specific goals attached to love that people may have, for example, getting a partner or getting married. You know, those are connected to love and we have goals in line with them. But in terms of sort of how can we be loving on an ongoing basis, we can be married to somebody, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're loving towards them every single day. So it's much more about the here and now. How can we serve these values on an ongoing daily basis? So guiding principles. And so they can be, you know, sort of relevant in different areas of life. So a lot of people will naturally have some values about health and well-being after cancer, or it might be fun, leisure. It might be people have a newfound enthusiasm for learning and growth and discovery. Or people might sort of do some work with us and think, wow, I really enjoy being creative, but I haven't done anything creative in years. How do we redress the balance there and bring that back into life in whatever form it looks like for them? So they are not goals. They are very separate from goals, but goals are naturally linked to values. So creativity is the value. The goal might be, you know, getting inventive with the sort of food that you cook, being a bit more creative. It can be anything. So family relations, it might be kind of what kind of brother, sister, son, daughter, uncle do you want to be? What personal qualities would you like to bring to that relationship? How would you interact with others? If you were to kind of look at a video of yourself going about your day, embodying the value of understanding, how would we see you behaving? And then thinking about kind of couples relationships, marriage relationships, partners, similar thing, kind of what personal qualities would you like to develop or attend to more on a daily basis that are important to how you want to be? What sort of relationship do you want to build? And if you were the ideal you in this relationship, what would that look like? Now, just a caveat there, this is not about achieving perfection. This is also accepting that none of us can be perfect and embody our values 100% of the time. It's about kind of, you know, having more awareness of our values and taking some practical actions to serve those. It's not about kind of beating ourselves up because we weren't the ideal parent, particularly in lockdown for those of you that have children. Okay, so friendship, parenting, all of this is a similar questions. You know, what kind of friend do I want to be? What are the values that I see as really important to being a friend? Is it reliability? Is it fun? Is it, you know, inspiring? What kind of a friend do I want to be? And that relates to things like career and employment as well. So what would make your work more meaningful? What would you like others to, how would you like others to feel when they're working with you? What kinds of values are relevant in your role or identity as whatever it is that you're doing? And this is something that, you know, we do support people to do a lot one-on-one. And also in groups, but it is about kind of taking a little bit of time to sort of reflect on these things and in all of these different kind of areas of life. So value directed goals. So I'd like you to maybe think about a value that you hold important to you at the moment. So for example, kindness, or it might be kind of leisure, fitness, health. Think of one value that maybe you know is kind of important to you. And think of something you can do this week an action you can take this week that might be in line with that value. And how do we make sure that this is a success experience? We set a goal which is SMART. So those of you who are teachers, you may know this. It's really helpful when we're setting goals to make sure that they follow these 5 things. The goal has to be specific. So get fit can be a really non-specific goal, very vague. We have no idea when we've achieved that. What does that look like? But if we had a goal in line with the value of fitness, which was to walk up and down Mount Eden, that might be the long-term goal. How do we work towards that? Well, in the next week, thinking about where you're at now, if you can do 20 minutes, maybe we set a goal to do a 20-minute walk somewhere, you know, in your neighborhood. That is achievable, it's measurable, so you can time it. It's realistic. And there's a time to it. So you set your day and your time, you set that, you write it down, because we know the research shows if we write a goal down, we're much more likely to do it. If we let someone else know or involve someone else in that goal, we're even more likely to do it. So setting SMART goals just avoids setting goals which are so high that we just have a failure experience and we lose motivation to try again. Start slow and small, and overachieving is much better than underachieving, and then you can set the goal much higher next time. The other thing about setting a goal is sometimes it might be important to have a little bit of a reward as part of that. So if you're doing a walk, find a part of that walk that's rewarding for you. It might be a cafe en route. It might be a particular viewpoint that's really beautiful. It might be listening to something that you really enjoy listening to as part of it. Make it as enjoyable, so you actually, it's appealing and you look forward to it, particularly if you are struggling with motivation to get going. So setting those SMART goals in line with your values. And so what you will have is a list of your 10 values, maybe your top 10, and then a few little goals in relation to each of those, short, medium, and long term. So when we know what our values are and we're striving to kind of live life in line with those, that's what we know is related to very high sense of well-being emotionally and physically. So people who know what their values are and they're doing what matters to them are happier and healthier. And so this is why we focus on this a lot, is making life more meaningful. Okay. So a few barriers that can get in the way to moving forward and setting those little initial goals. Reminder, so good old-fashioned memory, concentration. If people are busy, stressed, tired, how are we going to remember? What might get in the way? So the weather being terrible might be a problem if we set a goal to walk tomorrow and it's raining all day. What is our backup? Is it too hard? So remembering after 10 minutes, am I going to find this really hard? So keeping in mind that kind of realistic goal. Motivation. So the most important one is the R, relevant. Is it relevant for you right now? So a physiotherapist who gives somebody a stretch plan and says, go away and do that, and that will help you. Not likely to succeed unless they've spent time linking it in to what really matters for that person. So for example, I had a patient who loved fishing, and he saw the physio, and the physio said, what do you love doing? What's important to you? What do you want to be able to do? And he said, well, I want to be able to walk on the uneven ground and fish. So they worked on very specific exercises around how to help his balance and his strength, so that should he sort of feel he, you know, out of balance, he'd be prepared for that. So we need to link in goals to values. You know, if we want to be able to sort of play football with the grandkids, that's a meaningful value, which might be about connection or family behind the physical goal. And a lot of people do stumble or trip up by setting goals that actually aren't really connected to any values at all, particularly if it's sort of around getting back to work, you know. The job they do might not hold a lot of value for them. So we need to look at how do we increase value in that role, or how do we look at alternative roles? Because jobs can often be the one where people feel like they don't have a lot of values connected. So that might be something to just keep in mind. Okay, the good thing about motivation is it builds once we've had a success experience. And often people do in their minds say, I'll go out and do that thing when the motivation is up. When I've got motivation, I'll go and do that thing. But it actually works the other way around. We don't get motivation until we've done something, and then the motivation to do it again comes afterwards. So think about, you know, the number of times you might have woken up in the morning and thought, I don't have any motivation to go to work today. If we listened to that motivation level, we probably wouldn't make it into the office half of those days. But we override that, partly because we need to be paid, or we might get chastised by others. Where are you? We have other reasons, social kind of boundaries that keep us in check with overriding that motivation. But it's about ignoring the motivation level, whether it's a 1 or a 10. Have a plan, your SMART goal, stick to it, and you'll find that motivation comes afterwards, and that confidence comes afterwards, and we feel like, I want to do that again, and that maintains the pattern. Okay, I will move on. Okay, so self-care, really important throughout all stages of cancer, diagnosis, treatment, and post. If you have a good self-care routine, brilliant, good for you. If this is something you struggle with, it might be worth thinking, well, what is getting in the way of that? Is it me and my beliefs that maybe I don't deserve this, or find it hard to give myself permission, or it's hard to ask for the things I need that I know are good for me and good for well-being? We know it's great. We talk about it all the time with people, but it's about recognizing what are those little internal barriers that might get in the way, as well as practically looking at what are the external barriers. It's a hard time for a lot of people with juggling things at home and working from home. So I do recognize this is hard for people to achieve. So sometimes it's adjusting what's realistic, but time out, really important to focus on this after treatment. We know it's connected to resilience, coping, and feeling content. And so a lot of this is communication with yourself, but also communication with others, so they understand this is really important that I get this time out, and plan it and let others know when you're having that time. Okay. And this is a long list, or a few different things that you will see as examples. So a lot of these are kind of relaxation activities, or reading, baking, but let's remember self-care is also about saying no to things that we don't really want to do, or aren't meaningful to us, or are perhaps too much for us at that point. So it's saying yes to things that you know are good for you, but it's also about saying no, and that's very much communication boundaries. So most people know what it is that they find rejuvenating and kind of nourishing for them. But if that's something that you're struggling with, it's a good time to reflect, what are the sorts of things that maybe I could experiment trying and seeing how I feel. You know, people may think, oh, I've never tried meditation, I'm not sure if it's for me. Give it a go for a week and then see what changes for you. this is a fun time. This is where you're discovering what you want to add into life that might be good for you. I've talked about support and optimizing your support team. That feeling of being quite lost at sea, really common. Have a good relationship with your GP, because they become your primary caregiver once you're kind of discharged. The sort of go-to person if you have any unusual symptoms. If you don't like your GP, don't feel you have a good report, get a new one. That's okay. They won't hate you forever. And then book them in, and sometimes people interview their GPs before they sign up. It's an unusual thing, but sometimes people do that if they haven't had a good experience previously, and you can ask to do that. It can be good to keep those contact numbers handy for your medical team, so that you think, okay, I've got this really unusual feeling or symptom. Who might I need to call to check that out? Usually it's GP. Or it might be, you know, having Healthline, the number on the fridge, or it might be a cancer nurse if you're still in touch with them. So I think kind of writing down almost a list of who's in my team and how do they support me around what can be helpful. And not just your medical team, but your psychologist or your physiotherapist or people in your church community. If you're religious, it can be anybody that you can sort of put down as, you know, who's there for me. Okay. And I did talk about this a little bit earlier, but talk to your employer about returning to work slowly, thinking about some tasks going on hold until that you can sort of you can manage those. And sometimes it's sort of a contract change, so it might be kind of changing your hours, or it might be changing your role slightly in the short term. But there can be some people who can support you around returning to work. So WINS, career counsellors, occupational health. If you do work for a big company, they usually have those in-house. Or if you have private health insurance, there's also sometimes access as well. And I think the other thing is, if you have really lovely, devoted friends and family that ask you all the time about the cancer, it's okay to say, I'm doing all right, but do you mind if we don't talk about it today? Just to let you know and reassure you, I am coping, I'm fine, but do you mind if we just don't talk about it and we talk about other things? That is okay as well. And often I do talk about this concept of cancer-free time, where you kind of communicate to people, we're having cancer-free time, or we're going to have a cancer-free morning, where we don't go to that headspace. It can be quite helpful to put an active sort of container around those thoughts sometimes, and it can help others to know, okay, that's the expectation, I won't bring it up. However, the other thing is, again, about managing expectations they may have of you. So pushing back or saying no, learning how to say, I really acknowledge that, you know, you really want me to be back doing all the things I was doing before, and I want to, but at the moment I'm not yet there. A really good way of communicating things like fatigue is to have a kind of battery analogy. So I might say to people who need to have a literal explanation, it might be saying, hey, today I'm on 30%. So that means I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z today, but I can do this one thing. I'm going to need help with these other things today. And because energy can be a bit different each day, sometimes we need to communicate that on a daily basis. And it might be saying, hey, you know, today's a 30% day, so I'm going to reduce my workload today, or I might leave work early. Can be useful with children as well to have a way of conveying your energy level on like a visual. Sometimes it might be a traffic light system, or it might be a sort of a thermometer, 1 to 10. or teaspoons. You know, there's a teaspoon theory as well, where we say, hey, today I've got 2 teaspoons of energy. It's not a good day. That means I can't take you to the park today. I'm really struggling with my energy, but maybe another day. So finding really good ways to convey how you're feeling so that you feel understood and supported can be really helpful. And then I think the other thing is, of course, just to acknowledge is that your significant other, if you have a partner, their lives will have changed a lot as well. They may share a lot of the losses with you and be going through their own grieving process. So it can be really, really helpful to talk with them about what's changed. You know, almost sometimes I encourage people to write a list each. What's changed for you physically, psychologically, socially, practically? And the other person will do that too. And then you can share and connect through that shared experience of loss around those changes. But then that will also lead to a discussion about, well, the next chapter of life after treatment is about you being in charge of the changes you make, because so many changes have come along and happened to you without much control. This next chapter is about designing what changes do I want to be in charge of going forward. And that's where talking with others can be really helpful, and partners about what changes do we want to make as a couple. This is also things that we discuss a lot in person with people as well. And just briefly, if anyone has not heard of Support Crew, it's a really great website to use for organising support. It's free. You can create your own page, and if you're still really struggling after treatment, it can be good to just put a list of things you need help with on there and invite all the friends and family to that page, and they know these are the things that she needs or he needs, and I'll pick and choose what I want to do. So really, really helpful for getting the support you need and not getting the things you don't need as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about fears of recurrence. Anxiety is expected in cancer patients after treatment's finished. I expect it to show up for nearly every single person. Very common and very normal. The good thing is it does settle over time. The more evidence you build up of those scans coming back clear and the time moves on, it does become easier. And certainly, though, the frequency of those kind of intrusive thoughts about what if the cancer comes back, they do reduce as well. So we know it will show up, but it's about what are we going to do to manage those thoughts so they don't derail the day, so they don't significantly affect my mood. Practically, with those worries that people can typically experience, like waking up with a headache, oh my goodness, is this the cancer, has it spread? Or even just kind of having a shower, people might notice unusual things, and that can trigger off those fears of recurrence as well. Or aches and pains in the back, that can be another classic one that sends people into a tailspin, and your brain is sort of on high alert for danger. It's trying to keep you safe, so it's going to remind you, watch out for this, watch out for this, this could be a worry. It's trying to help you stay alive. That's what the brain does after cancer. It's that elevated threat perception. But often it can be overly cautious and often completely inaccurate and jumping to conclusions. It's sort of the better safe than sorry approach. However, there are some really useful strategies, and again, it's not something I can go into super amount of detail in, but the key thing is just to be aware of, could there be another explanation for this symptom? Could it be it's benign? What else might be contributing to this? What might be the non-threatening reason for this back pain? And I think remembering not every symptom is a sign of the cancer returning. get a really good understanding from your doctors about what would be a sign of recurrence and what definitely isn't. And then it can be about remembering, maybe giving yourself a couple of days, 2-3 days. There is sometimes this advice around the 48-hour rule. Wait 48 hours if something's really concerning you, or if the symptoms are really severe or worsening, of course you go to your doctor or ED straight away. But if they're kind of niggles, bit of back pain, it's not really getting significantly worse, but you're kind of worried about it, we usually encourage people to just wait a couple of days to see what happens. And then, you know, considering maybe ringing your GP just to check that out after a day or two. But I think remembering that your brain will automatically be very hypervigilant to unusual feelings in your body when it wasn't before. And that is purely just because of the cancer alert. It's gone on high alert. And so thinking about, how can I manage this feeling? What can I do? I can wait a couple of days, and if I'm still worried about it, then maybe I'll ring GP or my nurse and check it out. A little bit about managing ongoing fatigue. So it's a piece of string. When people ask me, how long does this go on for? When does it begin to lift? It's really frustrating not being able to give people certainty around that. But what we know can worsen fatigue is something we call booming and busting. So that relates to overdoing it with period of overactivity, and then crashing, which is then when we see a day or even more than a day of complete rest where we're not moving at all. And then we feel like we have to get back to doing all the things we didn't get to do when we crashed, so we overdo it again. So that period of really inconsistent activity, up and down, it's not good for our recovery. The body likes predictability and consistency. So whether it's kind of work or physical exercise or anything that you might find you're overdoing, really important to pace it and keep it the same as much as you can. So 20-minute walk every day is better than one huge great big walk at the weekend where your body's just recovering for 3 days afterwards. And often it won't tell you until afterwards that you've overdone it. And so it's kind of learning from that and thinking, okay, where is the amount that I can do without feeling worse afterwards and having that complete crash. Often people are in a kind of habit of getting up in the morning and doing a whole heap of stuff, getting everything done, or 3 hours of gardening in one go, because that's the way they've always done things. And then they have that crash in the afternoon. And the problem with the crash is it's not good for fatigue recovery, but it's also not good for mood, because we just can't do anything and it's frustrating. So pacing is going to become your magic strategy and your new way of doing things. It's not stopping doing things, it's just spreading them out across the day, doing them in a different way. So splitting the gardening up into a half an hour break, do something else, then come back to it across the day rather than one huge chunk. But so often people are so enthusiastic and they lose track of time, and then there's that kind of period of recuperation and recovery that needs to happen. Okay. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on the support services that are available. For those of you that don't know, we have nursing support throughout New Zealand. So your local division, wherever you live, will be able to offer you a cancer nurse. They visit you at home during treatment and then support you sometimes a little bit after treatment. Our psychology service is probably the most relevant one for people post-treatment, and that is around supporting you to cope with those challenges afterwards. So the easiest way to find out what's available in your local area is call the 0800 number, and they can direct you through to the local division that is near your home. some divisions offer yoga. Again, we're not offering that in Domain Lodge until level 1, but if you are keen on yoga online, there's a great, I haven't put it in the slide here, but there's a really great online yoga through somebody who's been through cancer himself. He's in Northland and his website's Yoga Fire. He's a fireman. So I recommend Yoga Fire. Okay, so we have run a little bit over time, but I'm going to take you through a really, really brief relaxation exercise. And then after, we'll skip into some questions and answers. Okay, so this is going to be a very, very brief exercise. But if you can, I really encourage you just to close your eyes. We'll shut the eyes, the gaze down whilst I talk you through a really brief exercise. So getting comfortable wherever you're sitting, lying, standing, closing those eyes down. And take your attention to following your breath in through the nose. And really slowly letting that breath out through the mouth or nose. It can help to have a count in for 3 and a count out for 5. Just focusing on that out breath becoming really nice and long. Really good way to help the body go calm. See if you can use your tummy muscles to draw that breath in instead of the shoulders or the chest muscles, which is typically what most of us do. See if you can relax any tension in the shoulder, the neck, sucking the air in, following the breath down into your lungs, and then breathing out using your belly muscles. So anyone that's learned abdominal breathing will know all about this. If you haven't learned about it, it's really useful to know. So I just want you to continue focusing on following the breath all the way in and then slowly following that breath out. See if you can maintain your focus of attention 100% on that breath. Be curious about the feelings in your body as you're noticing the expansion of your ribs, the movement in your chest, the air flowing in and out of your nostrils. Really attend to all those tiny details that we don't really attend to. It can help for a lot of people to have a point of focus. So it might be the part just below your nostrils, above your mouth, or it might be a part of your tummy. It can help to anchor people's attention by having a point in their body that they focus on. So we're just sitting with our breath, observing it. Thoughts will come up. Judgments will come up. Am I doing this right? Oh gosh, there's a really sore part. I don't really want to pay attention to that sore shoulder. Of course you'll have thoughts. If you notice those, whenever you pick up on awareness of those thoughts, just come back to focusing on your breathing. Let those go. This is the practice of mindfulness and just learning how to control our attention. And because we have our breath with us all the time, it's a really natural anchor to use when we're feeling overwhelmed, particularly caught up in a storm of thoughts, the what ifs, what if the cancer comes back? It's a good time to practice some of these techniques. It will help you ground yourself back to here and now. It can help just to have a phrase that's really powerful for you, like, right now, I'm safe. So just paying attention to your breath for one more minute. following in and following out. Just noticing anything that's showing up, thoughts or feelings, sensations, just noticing, observing those, and then returning back to your breath. It can be really natural to want to follow those thoughts and think about them, what they mean. Notice and let go. All right, and when you're ready, just really slowly open your eyes. Look around the room. Shift your external focus of attention externally. Look around. Notice things outside the window if you've got a window. And maybe just give yourself a bit of a stretch if that feels nice, just to stretch the arms or the legs out. Sometimes people might feel really sleepy, might need to wake themselves up. That's okay. So I'll just skip this slide. Our next webinar is on the 13th of October. So Hamish will be presenting on coping with the emotional roller coaster. So this is often for people at the beginning of the diagnosis and the beginning of that journey, but it can be relevant for anybody because cancer is a roller coaster regardless of where you're at on that journey. So again, same email if you're looking to register for that. Okay, so that is me. Thank you very much for coming along today. I hope it was helpful for you. And then we'll jump into some question time. So I'll just pause that video now.